Hey everybody, I want to take some time today to show you really an awesome custom visual that I just stumbled across. And it's one that I'm guessing 99% of you have never seen, probably never even heard of before. It's not publicized, it's not documented, and I just stumbled on it in the midst of one of the Enterprise DNA data challenges, and it's just so good and so versatile for a number of different types of visualizations that I really wanted to show it to you today and walk through how to use it. So it came about as part of Enterprise DNA Data Challenge number 7. It's the one I've got up on screen here now that dealt with purchases, inventory, and sales. And we had a data set that was primarily focused on purchase orders, receivables, and invoices. And what we needed to do was depict the time in between those events and visualize those in a useful way. And one of the things that kind of jumped out to me initially and thinking about the challenge was that it would be really cool to show the different events on a horizontal timeline that was kind of scaled by date. And I knew there wasn't a way to do that in the base visuals within Power BI. So I went into the App Source Marketplace and looked for custom visuals that could do that sort of horizontal timelining. And I found something called QueryOn Timeline. And here's the website for it. And it's got really very little documentation in the site. But it's got a number of different images of the different types of things you can do with it. And this was really what I was looking for, that to kind of have a bar with dates and then graphics and be able to include some additional information below the line on the purchase order dates and the bill of lading dates and invoice dates. But in looking through this, there's a lot of other ways to use it. There's a Kanban style. There's kind of similarly a scaled date version without the visuals. There's a waterfall style, a picture and line style, kind of a different scaled date and image style. So a lot of different things you can do with this. And as I started to investigate it, what I found is that there was no documentation. There was nothing up on YouTube. There was surprisingly nothing on the Microsoft community where you can almost always find, something useful to answer a question. And so I really kind of had to explore this one primarily on my own. I wanted to show you what I did with it and walk you through how to use it in case you're interested in applying it yourself. So this was my entry for challenge number 7. And this was the QueryOn Timeline visual. And so down here was the key. So it was the orange was for purchase order dates, the medium blue was receivables, and the dark blue was invoice dates. And so each of these purchase orders in many cases has multiple materials, each with different delivery dates, different invoice dates, and you can kind of click through this and it's fully dynamic. So if you go through and pick another purchase order, you'll see that the visual changes, and you can filter this by material. You can take it and move out on the focus and then see kind of the full range of dates associated with the different receivables and invoices. So there's a lot of information that's conveyed in this. If you go and you click through on any of the icons, it'll actually take you, if you click on the invoice, it'll take you to a mock invoice template. And similarly, if you go to purchase order, it'll take you to a purchase order template, and the same for deliveries and bill of lading. So it's really quite a sophisticated visual, and I wanted to show you how we went about putting this together. So in doing so, there are 5 key steps to get this to work right. The first of which is you need to prep your visuals. Second is you need to upload those to a public hosting site where you can easily grab the URLs for manipulation in Power BI. You need to get your supplemental URLs set up. So in this case, the templates that we link to each of these icon types. Then you need to set your data model up in a way that's consistent with the QueryOn Timeline requirements. And unlike a lot of visuals, which are pretty flexible in being able to deal with a variety of data models, this one requires some pretty strict limitations on how you structure your model. So you've got to think about that and take that into account ahead of time. And then you need to configure the visual itself. And it's got a lot of configurability, but some of it is not entirely intuitive. So I'll walk you through what I've learned to date on that. So if we start at step one with the visuals, what I like to do for my icons is use a site called Flat Icon. There are a lot of good icon sites. This happens to be the one that I use. And what I did was basically just came up with 3 key icons, one for purchasing, one for deliverables, and one for invoices. And then I altered those icons using my color theme. And I'm not going to go into how I did that, but there was a recent video I posted on easy hex code wrangling for Power BI. And so if you're curious on how to easily do that and get these to match your color theme, I'll put a copy of the link to that video in the comment section. So once you've got your icons all set up, where your photos or images or whatever you're going to link to the timeline, what you do is download those and then upload those to an image hosting site. And again, there are a lot of good ones. The one that I use is called the ImageBB. It's a free site, but it's got a lot of good capabilities. It's easy to use, and so these are the icons that I use in my visual, in my entry. And so the 3 that are used for the QueryOn Timeline are this one, the medium blue, and the dark blue invoice. And so the key here is what you need is to select those and then go to Get Embed Codes. And you'll see what it'll give you is viewer links. What you want to do is you want to drop this down and go to direct links. And then copy that and just copy that into Notepad. And we'll just hold on to that. I'll show you a little bit later what we're going to do with that. But the key is just to get these publicly hosted images, get the URLs for those set. And similarly, what you'll do is you'll go to the site for your supplemental URLs. And in this case, it was a place called Template Labs. And what I did is just pulled down the URLs for each of those purchase order, bill of lading, and invoice templates, and just put those in Notepad. And we'll handle those in much the same way that we're gonna handle the icon URLs. So I'll show you that in a minute. So the next thing we need to do is prep our data model. And I'll show you how most people in the challenge handled their data models. And this is Mudassir Ali's entry, and he put together a wonderful entry on this. I really encourage you to take a look at it. Here's what it looked like, and it's got a lot of really interesting visuals embedded in here and tooltips and some cool techniques. And what he did is he built a data model with 3 main fact tables. And that's a perfectly good approach in this challenge for that. It was a good way to do the calculations and to pull out the analytical findings that were needed. But in this case, it's not going to be a model that supports the timeline approach. And so what I ended up doing in mine was basically a lot of Power Query work to get those 3 fact tables into one end-to-end transaction table. And I can show you quickly on the forum. We do write-ups for basically how we put our entries together. And so this is my write-up, and I go through in really pretty extensive detail how I put that end-to-end transaction table together. So if you're interested in that approach, I'm not going to go through it here, but I will post the link in the comments as well. So if we go back to the model, that basically if we look at the transaction table first, what we'll see is right here is we've actually got in this transaction table, we've got a number of dates. We've got a purchase order date, and then I can show you over here, we've got an invoice date, we've got a receivables date, we've got a couple of other calculated dates in this table. And what's needed for the QueryOn Timeline is a single date column. So what I've done subsequently after putting this single transaction table together is unpivoted it, and then link that unpivoted version into my data model. And so if we look at the unpivoted, it says pivot here, but this is actually unpivoted. And if we take a look at the table, what we'll see is a single date column right here, and then a date category column. And the date category column is basically whether it's ordered, received, billed, and then I've got a couple of other, local and global maximums and minimums in here for those, but those basically collapse down into three main categories: ordered, received, and invoiced. And then what I've got here is the purchase order URL. And if we look back at the transaction table, what we'll see is calculated columns for these URLs. And basically what these are is, here we go. These are switch statements that look at the date category and then just assign the URL from the image hosting site for the appropriate icon. And similarly, what we do is the same thing, similar switch statement for assigning the template based also on that date category field. And so that's what, for each of the records, that's what assigns the proper icon and template. So if we go back now to the unpivoted, hang on just a sec. Yeah, we go back here to the unpivoted. What we'll see is that single date column, the date category, and then the two URL fields. And that's really what we need for getting the timeline set up properly. And so if we go into our visual and then go into the main fields here, what we'll see is that date category, and that is the unpivoted date category that I showed you. The date time can be one of two things: that it actually works for it to be the fact table date in the unpivoted version, or you can use the validated date in the date table. Either one works fine there. And then the optional URL is the template URL that's linked to the icon click, and then the image is that purchase order URL field. And one of the important things with that is that if we take a look at that field, what you need to do up here is set that as image URL. That it'll initially default to text, and if you keep it as text, those images are not going to render properly. So if you set it to URL, what you'll get is the images coming through properly from the image hosting site. So that is basically how to get the foundational fields set up properly on the visual. Now I just want to walk you through some of the formatting. And if we go through all these, the first one that's relevant is stagger text. And what that does is that creates this cascade effect down here. If we turn stagger text off, what we get is everything on the same line. And so when you've got multiple fields relatively close to each other, they just overlap and become unreadable. So we stagger the text on that. Auto calculation, I have no idea what that does. If anybody does know and can post that in the comments, that would be great. I've not been able to find any documentation on that, but I turned it on. It seems to work fine. Text on top just lets you move the text, the cascading text below to above the line. Bold titles does what it says. There's some date formatting you can do. Then on the x-axis, you can either have it show dates here on the axis or show nothing on the axis. There's some date formatting. And then these manual date scale switches are important, because what this does is this, if you turn this on, you can set the beginning point and the end point to remain constant. And that's really what we want here, is we've got a fixed period of time for the data, and we want to show relative to that fixed point in time where these different events occur. If we turn this off, what you're going to find is the last data point in every purchase order becomes the end point of that line. So if we turn that off here, now the end point is March. If we go to another one and just click down here, now the end point is also March, but with a different pattern. So what you want to do for this case is you want to turn manual scaling on, and we started it on January 1, which is the beginning of the data set, and then did it on June 30th, which is the end. In addition, manual scale pixels. What this does is this just sets the width of the line. The only reason we turned this on was just to create a little bit of a gap here so that it didn't run and create a scroll bar at the bottom. If we scroll down a little bit more, these single element properties, these are useful if you only have one event per category. And so what you can do is, this doesn't have full-blown custom conditional formatting, but what you can do is, in these single element properties, is you can set the font and the color and the properties of each category, but it only lets you do the first one. So I tried setting this, and it looks good where you've only got one of each category, but then the rest of them just are in the default color. So hopefully in a latter version, they're going to have full conditional formatting. If we go down further, image settings basically let you scale the size of your images, and that was important just to maintain the proper spacing here. If we go down here into style, this is, if you remember back on the website, I showed you the bar style. There's also the line style, which is similar. The waterfall style, which in this case loses a lot of the visual appeal, but I could see this being useful in certain cases. And then that Kanban style, which really doesn't do much for me on this type of visual. So we're gonna go with the bar style, but for different applications, you may want to experiment around with that. It's got a dynamic ability to show today's date. That wasn't relevant here because it didn't extend to the length of our data. And it's got the ability to actually download the dates as a calendar file. So into Google Calendar or Outlook, it'll put a little icon and you can download that. And then it's just the basic border shadow aspect switches. So that's basically how to configure the visual. As I say, that there's a lot of experimentation required in this to get it to look exactly right, but I think it really provides a cool and unique effect. Found this was a really, I think, valuable way to display this data. And so just wanted to highlight that for you today. Hopefully you found that useful, something you may want to experiment and play around with. If you did find that useful, please throw the video a like. And also please subscribe to Enterprise DNA TV if you haven't yet. Got a lot of good new video content coming out soon. And look forward to seeing you in the next video. So thanks a lot.